The valley didn't look like a battlefield. To the untrained eye, it could have been mistaken for an untouched piece of rugged beauty, jagged cliffs rising like teeth from the earth, narrow trails carved by centuries of wind, and an air so dry it stung the lungs. But Captain knew better. Every shadow could hide a rifle, every ridge could mask a mortar tube. Beauty had no place here. This was Afghanistan, and valleys like this one had swallowed units whole. Crouched on the edge of a shallow ridge, binoculars pressed to her eyes. Her unit, 40 American soldiers, was scattered across the valley floor, setting up temporary positions, checking gear and scanning the horizon. They'd been in country for 3 months, long enough for the dust to cake permanently onto their uniforms and for the tension to settle into their bones. Yet something about this deployment felt different, heavier, like the air itself was bracing for impact. The valley was quiet, too quiet, had learned to trust silence. In war it was never peace, it was patience. Somewhere beyond those, she believed eyes were watching them. She lowered her binoculars and adjusted the radio handset strapped across her vest. As a JTAC, Joint Terminal Attack Controller, her role was simple but unforgiving. If the unit was hit, she would be the voice that summoned steel from the sky. Air support, close strikes, life or death, all in her hands. Her soldiers trusted her with their lives, though they rarely said it aloud. Instead, their trust showed in subtle ways. Corporal Jeff Daniels, the youngest of the platoon, checked his rifle for the 3rd time that hour and shot her a nervous grin. "Ma'am, you really think anything's out there?" he asked. Offered him a measured smile. "In this place, always." She didn't tell him the rest, that her gut had been gnawing at her for days, a constant thrum of warning she couldn't shake. She felt it before in other valleys just before chaos erupted. Command back at the forward operating base had dismissed her concerns, citing a lack of hard intelligence. But intelligence in Afghanistan was always patchwork, whispers and shadows stitched together. She didn't need reports, she could feel the storm building. The soldiers went about their tasks, joking to keep the fear out. Sergeant Cole, their squad leader, teased Daniels for babying his rifle. Private pulled out a pack of cards, trying to start a game to pass the time. They laughed too loudly, the kind of laughter that tried to drown out the silence pressing in. Listened but didn't join. She couldn't afford distraction. She scanned the again, her eyes tracing the jagged rocks. No movement, no glint of steel, but she knew how good insurgents were at hiding. They had the terrain memorized, every cave and crevice, every angle to fire from. Ambushes weren't rare in valleys like this, they were inevitable. A faint breeze picked up, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and something else, gun oil perhaps, or maybe it was her imagination. She shifted her stance, hand resting near her radio. 40 lives. That was the weight she carried every time she clipped the handset to her vest. She wasn't just responsible for calling in the birds. She was the lifeline between survival and massacre. "Relax, Captain," Sergeant Cole said, strolling up beside her, chewing on a piece of gum like they weren't standing in a powder keg. "We've been out here a week and seen nothing. Maybe Command's right, maybe it's just ghosts this time." Shook her head. "Ghosts don't leave mortar trails." Cole frowned but said nothing. He knew her record. She wasn't prone to paranoia. When she felt danger, it usually wasn't far behind. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley in harsh gold. Shadows stretched long across the ground, dark fingers reaching for the soldiers, kept her gaze fixed on the cliffs. Somewhere out there, hidden in the rocks and silence, the enemy was waiting. She couldn't see them yet. She couldn't prove it, but she knew. And when it came, she'd be ready. The valley cracked open with fire. The first mortar landed short of their position, exploding in a deafening roar that sent dust and rocks spraying into the air. Soldiers hit the ground instinctively, pressing their faces into the dirt as shrapnel whistled overhead. A second mortar landed closer, showering the patrol with burning fragments of metal. Then the machine guns opened up. The above them erupted in muzzle flashes, the steady thump of PKMs and DK heavy guns echoing through the valley like thunder. Bullets tore into the ground and ricocheted off rocks, sparks and dust flying. The patrol was pinned, caught in a textbook kill zone. "Contact! Contact! North Ridge!" Sergeant Cole's voice roared above the chaos as he dragged Daniels behind a boulder. The young soldier's eyes were wide, his hands fumbling to reload his rifle. Was already moving. Her ears rang, her lungs burned from dust, but her instincts screamed louder than the battlefield. This was no random skirmish. It was coordinated, planned. The insurgents had been waiting for them, and now they were hammering the platoon from high ground. "Get cover, find sectors," Cole barked, his voice cutting through panic as he tried to organize the scattered soldiers. Returned fire blindly, his rifle rounds sparking against the rocks. But for every shot the Americans fired, 10 came back at them, a deadly storm from above. Ducked behind a jagged outcrop, yanking her radio close. Static hissed in her earpiece, broken by distorted voices. The insurgents were jamming their frequency, another sign this was no small band of fighters. She twisted dials, adjusted antennas, forcing the signal through. "Viper 1, this is Reaper. Troops in contact, repeat, troops in heavy contact," she called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Nothing but garbled static answered. Her pulse quickened. No air support, not yet. They were on their own. Another mortar screamed in, exploding near. The blast threw him backward, his body tumbling into the dirt. 2 soldiers crawled to him, dragging him into cover as he groaned, blood soaking his uniform. The sight sent a jolt through the platoon. This was only the beginning. Cole shouted, ducking low as bullets smacked into the rock above his head. "We're boxed in. They've got the ridge." She nodded, already mapping the battlefield in her mind. The cliffs loomed on both sides, funneling the patrol into a narrow stretch of open ground. They were sitting ducks. If the insurgents pushed forward, the entire unit could be wiped out within minutes. She needed a clear line of sight. Without it, air support would be useless, even if she managed to break through the jamming. Gritting her teeth, she crawled to a new position, ignoring the crack of rounds slamming into stone inches from her head. She peeked over the edge, catching glimpses of muzzle flashes higher up the slope. Shadows moved among the rocks, dozens of them, maybe more. "Jesus," she muttered, it wasn't just an ambush. It was a trap meant to kill them all. Behind her, Daniel's voice shook. "Ma'am, what do we do? We're surrounded." Locked eyes with him, her expression hard but calm. "We hold, and we fight. I'll get us out of this." But inside she knew the truth. The odds were brutal. They were outnumbered, pinned in open terrain. Survival hinged on one thing, her ability to bring the sky down on them before the enemy closed in. She tried the radio again, sweat dripping into her eyes as she fine-tuned the signal. A faint voice broke through the static. Pilots circling miles away, faint but there. Hope sparked. "Stand by for coordinates," she began, when the earth erupted again. Another mortar detonated just meters away, the concussion wave slamming into her chest and knocking her backward. The radio slipped from her grasp, skittering across the dirt. Pain exploded through her body as shrapnel bit into her side. Her ears rang with the sound of soldiers screaming, the relentless hammer of machine gun fire, the hiss of her own ragged breathing. The ambush was in full swing now, and the valley had become a furnace of dust, fire, and blood. For 40 soldiers, survival was slipping away second by second. And Captain knew, if she didn't get that radio back, none of them would make it out alive. Captain's world had narrowed to the dirt beneath her and the sky above. The mortar had thrown her backward and her legs screamed in agony. She tried to move, but something had shattered, bones twisted unnaturally, blood pooling beneath her. Pain ripped through her lower body in waves, each one more intense than the last, yet she could not allow herself to scream. Not now, not when 40 lives depended on her. Around her, chaos reigned. Bullets spat fire from them, ricocheting off rocks, sending clouds of dust into the air. Soldiers shouted, some in orders, others in panic, could barely register who was who. She caught a glimpse of Daniels, frozen behind a boulder, hands trembling as he tried to reload his rifle. Groaned, clutching a bloodied arm. The ground felt alive with danger. Every inch she had to move was an open invitation to death. Her radio had skidded several feet away, partially buried in dirt and rocks. She could see it, could almost reach it, but her shattered legs would not cooperate. A searing wave of pain shot through both lower limbs every time she tried to drag herself forward. Her mind screamed for her to stop, to let go, to surrender to the blackness creeping at the edges of her vision. But her instincts, honed from years of training, of countless deployments, refused to listen. Sergeant Cole's voice cut across the battlefield, panic mixing with authority. "You okay? We need that call." "I'm fine," she gasped through clenched teeth. "Just hold on." "Fine?" Her body laughed at the lie, mocking her. Blood poured freely, soaking her uniform, her hands trembling as she reached forward. She wrapped her fingers around the handset, only to have a bullet ricochet nearby, knocking her hand back. Another strike of metal against flesh sent her back down into the dirt. The world spun, sounds fractured into staccato bursts of explosions and gunfire, yet her mind focused on one single objective: reach the radio, call in the save the unit. Began her crawl, dragging herself inch by inch, elbows scraping against sharp stones. Her legs, useless and broken, trailed behind her like dead weight. Each movement made her cry out, the pain unbearable, yet she forced herself forward. She measured her motions between bursts of enemy fire, timing them with deadly precision. The battlefield around her blurred into chaos, Daniel screaming encouragement, bleeding, bullets whistling. She ignored it all. She remembered training, the countless simulations of calling in danger close, fire, coordinates measured, communication precise. That knowledge now burned in her mind like a lifeline. If she could just reach the radio, she could give the pilots the coordinates they needed. She could bring hell from the sky and turn this valley from a tomb into a lifeline. Every inch felt like a mile. The heat of the sun beat down on her back, the dust turned to a choking grit, and blood blurred her vision. She tasted iron with every breath, her body screaming in rebellion. But she could not stop. One hand reached, grasped the radio, slipped, reached again. And finally, her fingers curled around it. The relief was fleeting, her arms shook violently, and she had to brace herself with every ounce of strength she had left. She dragged her torso behind the radio, pressed it to her chest, and inhaled shakily. The soldiers around her were still pinned, still fighting, still counting on her. She whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, "I can do this. I have to. I will not let them die." Pain, exhaustion, and fear were secondary to purpose. Had been trained for split-second decisions, for chaos, for sacrifice. And now, lying on her back, legs useless and broken, she realized the truth she had always known. Sometimes, survival depended not on strength but on sheer, unyielding will. She had reached the radio, she had survived the hit. And now the fight was about to get worse. Captain lay on the jagged dirt, broken and bleeding, the radio clutched tightly to her chest. Her legs no longer obeyed her commands. Shattered bones refused even the slightest movement. The valley around her was alive with gunfire, the acrid smell of gunpowder and dust hanging thick in the air. Every second counted. Every second could be the difference between 40 soldiers surviving or dying. She could not wait. With a deep, shuddering breath, she began to drag herself forward. Her arms dug into the coarse soil, elbows scraping against rocks and gravel. The terrain tore at her skin, every inch forward a brutal battle against pain and gravity. Blood streaked the earth as she moved, the effort nearly overwhelming. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, yet her mind focused solely on the goal: reach the edge where she could transmit coordinates to call in the. The crack of bullets splintered nearby rocks and timed her progress with the rhythm of the firefight. When gunfire intensified, she stayed flat, allowing the enemy to expend rounds on her abandoned position. When it paused, she surged forward, dragging herself a few more agonizing feet. Each movement sent shockwaves of pain through her broken legs, yet she refused to cry out. Her screams would not save anyone. Her courage might. Around her, the soldiers fought desperately. Daniels and dragged the wounded to cover, bullets snapping over their heads. Explosions from mortars and RPGs shook the valley floor. could feel the vibrations through her chest as the ground trembled beneath each blast. The enemy was relentless, their fire precise, their control of the near perfect. A sudden mortar landed a few meters from her. The blast threw her sideways, pain shooting through every nerve in her body. For a moment the world went black at the edges, yet she refused to stay down. She gritted her teeth, curled her arms beneath her chest, and pulled herself forward. Inch by inch she moved, one hand in front of the other, one elbow dragging the other. The distance was almost 200 meters, and each meter felt like a mile. Memories flashed in her mind, training exercises, previous deployments, the faces of the soldiers who had trusted her to guide them from above. She thought of Sergeant Cole's calm, disciplined voice, of Daniel's nervous energy, of quiet strength. They were alive because of her. They would not die on her watch. The radio, partially buried in dirt a few feet away, became her obsession. She imagined it calling air support, jets screaming overhead, the erupting in fire. That vision propelled her forward. She twisted her body over jagged rocks, her elbows raw and bleeding, her uniform shredded. Dust and blood mingled in her mouth, choking her, but she spat and kept moving. Time had no meaning. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into an eternity. Every muscle in her upper body screamed, yet she moved with calculated determination. She gripped rocks, dug her hands into the soil, and leveraged every ounce of strength remaining. Occasionally, she risked a glance upward, noting the enemy fire positions, mentally mapping them for when she could finally transmit coordinates. Finally, she reached a small rise enough to shield her from direct fire for the moment. Her body quaked with exhaustion, sweat mixing with blood. The radio was still just out of reach, but hope surged. One more push, one more stretch, one more crawl. She whispered to herself, voice hoarse and trembling, almost there. Don't stop. You can do this. Pain and fear had become part of the rhythm of her movement. The valley, once a silent threat, had transformed into a living, breathing adversary, yet refused to yield. She was crawling through hell itself, but her eyes were fixed on salvation, for herself, for her soldiers, for the 40 lives depending on her. And in that valley of fire, dust, and blood, her crawl became a battle of willpower, a testament to human endurance, and a prelude to the thunder she was about to summon from the sky. Captain's hands finally closed around the radio, her fingers slick with blood and dust. She pressed it to her chest, feeling its weight like a lifeline. Around her, the valley was chaos incarnate. Gunfire cracked from the ridges, mortars slammed into the earth, and soldiers shouted in terror and determination. Yet for the world had narrowed to one purpose: call in the save her unit and survive long enough to see it happen. Her legs were useless, shattered beyond repair, but her mind remained razor-sharp. Every training exercise, every simulation of danger close procedures flashed through her memory. This was it, the moment she had trained for but never hoped to face in reality. One miscalculation, one slip in coordinates, and the aircraft overhead could kill her own soldiers instead of the enemy. But hesitation was a luxury she could not afford. Her throat burned as she lifted the handset to her lips. Viper 1, this is Reaper. Troops in contact. Repeat, troops in heavy contact. Request immediate air support. Coordinates incoming, she whispered, her voice tight but controlled. Static crackled through the earpiece. Somewhere miles above, pilots were circling, engines roaring, waiting for her to speak the numbers that would decide life or death. She took a steadying breath, fingers trembling as she input the coordinates. Each number had to be precise, measured to the meter. One mistake would be catastrophic. Sweat mingled with blood on her face as she read aloud the grid references, repeating them with calm authority despite the pain shredding through her body. The sound of distant jet engines seemed to merge with the cacophony of gunfire, explosions, and screams around her. A nearby mortar slammed into the dirt just meters away, the concussion wave lifting her body slightly. Dust filled her mouth, making it hard to breathe, but she forced herself to remain upright, gripping the radio. Her eyes, blurred with sweat and blood, scanned the battlefield, making last-second adjustments. Adjust strike 20 meters north. Danger close, she barked, her voice hoarse but unwavering. For a moment silence fell on the other end. Then the pilot's voices, calm but urgent, acknowledged her commands. "Copy, Reaper. Weapons hot. Danger close confirmed. Clearance to engage." Exhaled sharply, a tiny surge of relief mixed with fear. The valley below was still a death trap, but now she had a weapon more powerful than any on the ground, a sky full of fury ready to descend on the enemy. She held the handset like a lifeline, transmitting corrections and updates as the jets streaked toward their targets. Explosions began to rip through the first missiles hitting with earth-shattering force. Enemy fire faltered, scattering in panic. Soldiers, still pinned, saw the cliffs erupt with fire and began to fight back with renewed hope. She continued to relay coordinates, adjusting for shifting positions, refusing to let the pilot's precision waver for a single second. The minutes stretched like hours, every second measured in explosions and heartbeats. Felt herself fading in and out of awareness, pain clawing through her consciousness. Still, she stayed on the line, her mind focused entirely on the "keep coming." North Ridge, left flank adjust. That's it, fire now. Her commands were a lifeline, her determination more lethal than the weapons she called down. As the first wave of bombs tore into enemy positions, soldiers around her began to regroup, taking advantage of the chaos. Felt a faint tremor of hope that was working. 40 lives depended on her courage, her training, her willpower, and despite her broken body, she refused to let them down. The valley was no longer just a trap. It was becoming a battlefield they could survive. Lying in blood and dust, radio clutched to her chest, had become the eye of the storm, a human conduit for thunder from the sky. The sky answered Captain's call with roaring engines and thunderous explosions. Above the jagged ridges, F-16s screamed past, releasing missiles that tore into enemy positions with precision. The valley shook under the force of the blasts, dust and debris raining down, choking the air. Rockets streaked from Apache helicopters circling overhead, igniting the cliffs in fire and smoke. The insurgents, once confident in their kill zone, scattered in panic, their disciplined assault crumbling into chaos. Lying on the blood-soaked ground, felt the reverberations through her chest as each explosion hit. Her ears rang, vision blurred, but she clutched the radio with the last shreds of strength she could summon. Every breath was a battle, every movement agony. She continued relaying coordinates, adjusting for the enemy's sudden shifts, her voice steady despite exhaustion and pain. Around her, the soldiers began to react. Daniels fired with renewed precision, pulled the wounded to better cover, and Cole coordinated suppressive fire. The tides of the ambush were turning. The enemy, once dominant and relentless, was faltering under the sudden, overwhelming force from above. His determination had bought them this chance. Another explosion ripped through the North Ridge. The air was filled with smoke, fire, and the acrid smell of melted metal. Enemy fighters, caught between the relentless and the determined ground assault, faltered and fled. The valley that had moments ago seemed like a death trap was slowly shifting into a battlefield of survival. Could barely see, but she felt the change, hope pushing back against despair. Pain clawed through her body and her legs throbbed with unbearable agony. Yet she continued to relay adjustments, knowing one missed coordinate could cost lives. "Left flank, more to the north, clear that ridge," she barked into the handset, voice raw but resolute. Even as darkness edged her vision, she refused to let go. The soldiers depended on her. 40 lives depended on her. Explosions continued to tear through the enemy's positions, reducing their firing points and scattering them into pockets of vulnerability. Units seized the opportunity, moving from cover to cover, pushing the advantage that had been bought at such a high cost. Every soldier alive was testament to her unwavering focus, her ability to endure more pain than seemed humanly possible. She watched Daniels crawl toward a fallen comrade to pull him to safety, dragging another soldier out of the open, Cole shouting orders to consolidate their position. The valley, once a death trap, was now their domain. Slowly, inch by inch, they were reclaiming it. His heart pounded in sync with the explosions overhead. She had summoned hell, and it had arrived with surgical precision. Minutes stretched like hours. Every second felt like an eternity but stayed on the line, coordinating, calculating, directing. The insurgents' morale shattered. One by one, they abandoned their firing positions, running for cover or falling to the relentless firepower raining from the sky. 40 soldiers, pinned and desperate just moments ago, were beginning to breathe again. They were alive. Finally, this fury subsided. Silence, broken only by distant gunfire and the moans of the wounded, fell over the valley. Lay on the ground, chest heaving, blood and dust coating her body. Her arms trembled, but she held the radio one last time. The valley, once a tomb waiting to claim 40 lives, was quiet, and survival against all odds had prevailed. For Captain, the battle was far from over. Her body was broken, battered, and bleeding. Yet in that moment, she knew she had done what no one else could. She had turned the tide. She had brought fire from the sky. And because of her courage, every soldier in that valley would live to fight another day. The valley was silent, save for the distant crackle of residual gunfire and the groans of the wounded. Smoke curled from shattered, and the acrid stench of explosives and burning earth hung heavy in the air. The ambush had ended, the insurgents either dead, wounded, or fleeing into the rugged mountains beyond. Captain lay in the dirt, her body battered, broken, and bloodied, but alive. She clutched the radio tightly, her lifeline through the chaos, as the reality of what had just occurred settled around her. Sergeant Cole was the first to reach her side, eyes wide with disbelief. "You did it," he said, voice barely audible over the wind whipping through the valley. "You saved them. You saved all of them." Tried to smile, but the effort sent pain shooting through her shattered legs. Her breathing was ragged, each inhale a struggle. "We all did it," she whispered, refusing to fully acknowledge the truth. She couldn't let herself rest, couldn't allow the weight of what she had just endured to crush her now. 40 lives had been balanced on the edge of a knife, and she had carried them across that precipice. The soldiers began to regroup, their faces etched with shock, relief, and exhaustion. Daniels and helped each other to stand, checking themselves and the other wounded for injuries. Those who were able scanned the valley for any remaining threat, rifles raised and steady. They had survived a near-impossible ambush, thanks to one woman's determination, and their collective relief was tangible. Corporal Daniels stumbled toward, kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, we're all alive because of you," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Tears streaked his dusty face. For a moment, closed her eyes, letting the weight of the statement settle, letting herself feel the magnitude of what she had accomplished. 40 lives, 40 families, saved because she had refused to give in to pain, fear, or exhaustion. The medics arrived, moving quickly to stabilize the wounded. They lifted onto a stretcher, careful not to aggravate her shattered legs. She gritted her teeth as she was carried, every jostle sending searing agony through her body, but she allowed herself a fleeting sense of victory. Her unit was alive. That was all that mattered. As the helicopter blades chopped the air overhead, preparing for medevac, caught glimpses of her soldiers looking at her with awe. They had witnessed her crawl across 200 meters of broken earth, bleeding, battered, and relentless, to call in the firepower that had saved them. Their gratitude was unspoken but unmistakable. She had become a symbol of courage, resilience, and selflessness. Even in her weakened state, her mind began to assess the battlefield. She noted the enemy positions destroyed, the soldiers accounted for, and the areas still vulnerable. Her training had not faltered despite her injuries. Her actions had shifted the momentum, and even now she remained focused, thinking one step ahead. As the helicopter lifted her and the most critically wounded soldiers out of the valley, the rest of the unit gathered their gear and secured the perimeter. The ambush had been brutal, nearly catastrophic, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond among the soldiers. And at the center of it all was their JTAC, their guide, their lifeline. She had crawled through unimaginable pain so they could stand. The valley, once a place of impending death, was now a testament to survival, to human will, and to courage. Every soldier who walked away would carry the memory of sacrifice with them forever. They had been pinned and facing certain death. Yet 40 Americans stood because one woman refused to fall. And as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, casting long shadows over the ravaged valley, story began to take shape. A story of heroism, determination, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. Captain woke in a sterile hospital room, the bright light stabbing at her vision. Her body felt foreign, broken legs, bandaged arms, bruised ribs, and an exhaustion that went deeper than muscle or bone. She tried to move, only to feel the sharp reminders of the valley, shattered bones, torn muscles, and the lingering ache of every inch she had dragged herself across the earth. Pain was constant, but beneath it, a quiet satisfaction lingered. 40 soldiers had lived because of her. That thought alone made the agony bearable. Surgeries had taken hours and recovery would take months, possibly years. Doctors shook their heads at her injuries, marveling that she was even alive. Yet she refused to let despair take root. In her mind, the valley, the explosions, and the fear remained vivid, etched into her memory with precision. She could still hear the shouts of her soldiers, the roar of the jets, and the crackle of gunfire. Every detail reminded her why she had crawled, why she had endured, why she had refused to surrender to pain or fear. News of her heroism spread quickly through the military. Stories circulated in the barracks, in training rooms, and on command channels. Became more than a captain, she became a symbol of resilience. The soldiers she had saved visited when they could, some quietly, some teary-eyed. Daniels and even Cole arrived one by one, each expressing gratitude that words could barely contain. Every visit was a reminder, her sacrifice had not been in vain. Months later, stood on a podium in a packed ceremony at the forward operating base. The silver star was pinned to her uniform, gleaming in the sunlight. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and soldiers saluted. Yet she remained humble, deflecting the accolades. "I didn't do this alone," she said, voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Every soldier in that valley fought bravely. I only did what any JTAC would do to protect their unit." Behind her, her soldiers nodded. They knew the truth. Without, many of them wouldn't be standing. Her crawl across 200 meters of shattered earth, calling in a danger close, had been the difference between life and death. It wasn't just bravery, it was skill, endurance, and unshakable commitment. Her story was taught in JTAC training, a real-life example of courage and precision under pressure. Recovery was long and grueling. Physical therapy challenged every fiber of her being. Walking again became a triumph measured in inches, each step a reminder of her ordeal. She faced frustration, fear, and pain daily, but she refused to quit. Every step she took was for the soldiers she had saved, for the valley she had survived, for the legacy she had created. Her name became synonymous with heroism. Young recruits studied her actions, veterans spoke of her crawl with reverence, and officers cited her determination as a blueprint for leadership in extreme conditions, yet remained grounded. She remembered the dust, the gunfire, the screams, and the fear. Those memories reminded her that courage wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about action when it mattered most. Years later, she visited the valley with some of her unit. The ridges were quiet now, almost peaceful. But for the soldiers who survived, the memory of that day was alive in every rock, every ridge, every shadow. 40 soldiers had walked away because one woman refused to fall. And though the valley would one day fade from view, the story of her crawl, her sacrifice, and her unwavering courage would endure. Heroes, realized, did not always walk tall. Sometimes they crawled through hell, bloodied and broken, so others could stand. And that legacy, the courage, the determination, and the sheer will to survive, would live forever.